Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight at this GSGA um, Facebook Live event. My name is Kimberly Sirota, and I am a partner of the Gout Support Group of America. Just wanted to, again, thank you all for being here and taking the time. This program is probably going to be about an hour, and I'll give you a brief overview of how we are going to lay out tonight's program. As with all the emails and media that we did and that you see on your page right now, this is kind of centered around the beginning of this program is going to be centered around clinical trials and clinical trials 101. So that part of our program is going to take about 20 minutes. And then from there, we're going to do a real open Q&A session with our two amazing co-founders of Gout Support Group of America, Dr. Chris Parker and Gary Ho. So we're really excited for that. So if at any time you have questions, please feel free to put it in the Facebook live stream comments, or if you're joining us via Zoom, put that into the chat box or the Q&A box on there. We're happy to answer all of your questions. But I do want to remind everybody that while we do have a wonderful doctor and rheumatologist here with us today, we urge you to definitely talk with your healthcare provider about any concerns that you may have, and develop that relationship and make sure that you're working with your healthcare provider to get your health on the right track. So now I want to go ahead and introduce our two co-founders here of the Gout Support Group of America. First, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Ho to give an introduction of himself.
I am Gary. As you guys probably know, I lived with gout since 1994. I've been controlling gout, managing it proactively, and pain-free for, I think it's about 13 years, since 2010. I am married, live in Florida. I am a wannabe fisherman, and I like doing non-impact workouts at the gym. So, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. And Dr. Parker?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for logging in. Chris Parker. I'm a rheumatologist, background on the rheumatology and gout part. I became very interested in gout in the late 1990s when I was at Walter Reed. Again, I was in the Army. And from there, I really made it an area of special interest, started doing clinical research, publishing in the area, and ultimately, quite a ways back there, Gary and I co-founded the Gout Support Group of America to really bring education to the entire community at the grassroots level. Also, I'll say that I'm a person that has gout in the family, kind of genetics, grandpa, dad, brother. And so I wanted no part of it. So I proactively take medicine because I don't want it. I know how bad it is. So I'm in the club in that regard.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Parker. As I mentioned before, my name is Kimberly Sirota. I've been a partner of Gout Support Group of America and worked with these two amazing gentlemen for the past year. I am a social worker by trade, and so this is really in my heart, and I have really loved working with the Gout Support Group of America, not only Dr. Parker and Gary, but all of the supporters and everyone that is on the Facebook group. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. So let's go ahead and get right into the crux of tonight's program, is where we're going to talk about clinical trials 101 and everything you need to know from a doctor and the patient. So oftentimes clinical trials, when you hear that can sometimes evoke different emotions in people: hope or fear, anticipation or uncertainty. And we're here today to really take the guessing game out of clinical trials. The GSGA team has been working really hard over the past year to build up the research page on our website to provide a one-stop shop for all the questions that you may have about clinical trials in gout. We have one-pagers, we have a list of all of our partners with their clinical trials, blogs, FAQs, and we're going to continue to do more along the way. You'll hear throughout this presentation from Dr. Parker and Gary really about why clinical trials have been so important to both of them, and what clinical trials are able to not only give back to the person participating, but also to the gout community in general, and really help research move along. So tonight, we're going to go ahead and start with Dr. Parker. And Dr. Parker, you've really helped a lot of patients enroll in clinical trials and participate in this clinical trial process. Can you walk us through some of the basics of what is a clinical trial?
Yeah, let me do that. And I'll say in my background for as it pertains to clinical trials, I did another fellowship just in medical research at NIH and the Walter Reed Institute of Research. So this has definitely been an important area for me. And most people, when they think of clinical trials, and this is totally reasonable to think of it this way, it's because a pharmaceutical company perhaps is trying to understand if they have a new technology that's really going to help patients and be safe and all those things. And so there's different phases of a trial to help answer those questions. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time covering that today. But I will say that sometimes clinical trials are done to answer non-treatment questions, meaning help us understand the course of a certain condition or disease, some of its background, where we perhaps want to understand the genetics that lead up to someone getting a condition like this. So there's lots of questions that can be answered in a clinical trial, but most of the time it really is focusing on a therapy. Gary and I started talking about clinical trials a long time ago, and as it pertains to the Gout Support Group of America on Facebook, because we worried a lot that discussions about management might seem out of reach to people who don't have medical insurance or limited financial resources or both. And we're like, man, how could those people benefit from the knowledge that we share? And it was, again, so long ago that we thought we really want to have a listing of clinical trials that people could get connected with, because you don't have to have medical insurance or any financial resources. Most of the time they're free to the person that's enrolling into a trial. And sometimes they even pay you a little bit of money along the way to do blood draws or that type of stuff. And so we really wanted to have a relationship with research for everybody who is involved in the Gout Support Group of America. When someone decides to participate or just even consider participating, there's always a educational component just to help people understand what therapeutic trial is being studied right now. How is it different than the current standard of care that we have in the community? Why is it a new technology? What are the potential safety risks or issues that are going to be answered during the trial, just to know what to look for? How often are those evaluations done? So there'll be a person that walks you through that, both the doctor, or sometimes there's somebody called a research coordinator that really helps, really assures that you understand the clinical trial as a rule. So safety and efficacy, meaning how well it works. In clinical trials, I like to tell my patients that this, if you're in a trial, is going to feel different than going to your doctor in a good way, because in a trial, there'll be a person that's really hand-holding you, making sure you take your medicines. If you have any troubles, what are those? They literally want to write down every single thing that you think may or may not be related to the new medication along the way. And so to me, it feels like VIP, meaning very important person type of medical care, because most of us don't get handheld, if you will, during our visits, and a really organized follow-up strategy and a number to call should anything pop up. I mean, man, you're really getting evaluated along the way. And then last, I'll say, well, two things I'll kind of end with. Some clinical trials, both the study medicine and the comparator group, are getting a medication, right? And other times, the new medication that's being studied is being compared to a placebo. And as problematic as that might sound, it's very important that if we're studying a new medicine, we have something to compare to answer the question, if this is better, how much better is it? 10%, 20, 50, 80, really, you want a numerical way to compare. And the same thing about safety. If somebody says, wow, that looks like that medicine causes headaches. Well, headaches are common compared to what? Right. And so again, that placebo arm is very, very important. And if you said, whoa, I don't want to get a placebo, I want to really get on the new therapy. And the answer to that issue is always the investigators, the clinical trial pharmaceutical company, they're not going to tell us. They're not going to tell me or the patient who's on what. Otherwise, that could cause what we call bias, meaning you're going to decide in your head before you ever tell them how you're doing, that either, oh, this is so working so good, or I'm having all kinds of trouble, or it's not working at all. So placebos are very common. Here's the good news on placebos. Almost everybody in the clinical trial will report to me they feel better. And it's amazing, but they like to assure me, oh, I'm not on placebo, I'm on the real thing. I go, really? How do you know? And they go, well, I feel so much different. And I always tell them the same thing. I don't know. They don't tell me. But I will say that our minds are very, very powerful. And so it's not uncommon, no matter what side of the fence you land on during the trial, people tend to feel better. And then if you said, well, what happens at the end of a trial? Because there's always an endpoint, right? And I go, right. Oftentimes these days, the pharmaceutical company, if it looks like this is an effective and safe medicine, they do what's called open label extension, meaning everybody is now going to know they're on the medicine. If they got randomized to get placebo at the beginning, now they get the medicine as well. So now everybody knows they're on medicine, and we're just going to follow people long term, just so we can understand more about the safety of a medicine over a prolonged period of time. So all of those things can come up in a clinical trial. Hopefully that gives you a good lay of the land.
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Parker. So Gary, I know that you participated in a clinical trial while you were under the care of Dr. Parker. Can you kind of talk us through what you were thinking when Dr. Parker said, hey, there's this clinical trial I'm thinking about, that you might be a perfect candidate for? What were you expecting? What were your emotions? Were you nervous? Were you excited? Could you just kind of talk us through those feelings? I think this will help others who are considering going into a clinical trial understand some of the emotions that you may be going through.
Yes, absolutely. And Chris, thank you for that. I mean, every time I listen to you, I feel like I've learned something new, right?
I'm glad.
I've known you for so long, and
Yeah.
that's still the case. So to really answer that question, I think the hearers need to understand really my journey and what I had gone through trying to get my diagnosis. My journey started in 1994. For those that haven't heard, that is when I experienced my first gout attack walking across campus at the age of 24. That evening, I called my dad and told him that there's something strange happening with my ankle. It feels like I had broken my ankle, and all I was doing was just walking across campus. He told me to go to the doctor. He thinks that I have gout. It runs in the family. His dad has gout. He has gout. And now it could be passed over to his oldest son. I, of course, being a good son, I listened to my dad. I went to the doctor. And I remember the doctor telling me, you're just too young to have gout. And he really made me question myself, like, am I really feeling the pain that I'm feeling? is my experience real, right? And so I started to question my reality, but then everything kind of disappeared when he said, I don't have gout. When he said, I don't have gout, I actually grabbed onto what he said. And as a doctor, I trusted in what he said. And I celebrated in the fact that I don't have gout. Went home and because it was really the first attack, the pain was there for maybe a few days and then it subsided and it went away. That was my beginning of my gout journey. And so for the next 16 years, the gout pain would come on off and on. And as time went on, it would come and stay, visited me for longer periods of time, to the point where, again, I started in 94, and in 2010, at the ripe age of 40, remember I started at age 24, and now I blinked. I'm 40 years old. I'm using crutches, and at times I'm using a wheelchair. When the gout attacks would come, it's horrific pain. For you gouters out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When someone says, hey, describe to me the pain that you go through, you know, I picture 1,000 men with pitchforks. That's one of my word pictures I have, that is inside my body trying to jab their way out. And so, you know, picture that. I remember at times laying in bed and just a throbbing hot sensation that I would feel either on my big toe or in my knee, you know, or an ankle, wherever it's flaming. I remember I would turn the fan on and just the breeze of the wind blowing across the affected area would send shivers through my body, you know, turning a grown man into a little baby, honestly, you know. I'm pretty tough, and I really believe that my pain threshold, as I think all people that suffer with gout have, they have a real high pain threshold, and I'm weeping, you know, and I'm crying. In 2010, I said, enough is enough. I need to do something. I need to be proactive and figure this out. So I looked up who would treat gout. I found out that it was a rheumatologist. I found his name on the website. I called up, made an appointment, and then I saw him. And honestly, when I sat there with him in his office, for that first 10 or 15 minutes, he just basically asked me, tell me your story. What's going on? And I just spent that 10 minutes and I told him what I had been going through for the last 16 years. And instead of gaslighting me and trying to make it so that I wasn't, you know, trying to convince me that I wasn't going through what I was going through, he actually listened with compassion and empathy. And then at the end of it, he said, well, it sounds to me like you might have gout. And we can actually test for it. It's real simple. We'll do a blood test. And if your uric acid level is higher than 6.8% milligrams, your blood is probably saturated. You probably have gout. And I'm thinking to myself, when Chris said this, I'm like, are you telling me that for 16 years, when I would go to a doctor or the ER complaining of gout pain or pointing to a swollen joint, you know, that's red, and if they just breathe on it, I'm crying. And all they had to do was do a simple blood test to determine if I had gout or not. I honestly couldn't believe it. We did the blood test, and Chris comes back and says, your acid level is north of 10. I'm like, well, I don't know. What does that mean? Right. He's all, well, I think your body, Gary, overproduces uric acid and or is not able to rid itself of uric acid. And I think I'm gifted with both. I like overproduce and you know, not able to rid the uric acid. So I had a very high level And I probably had been living that way for the last 16 years. And at that time, if you know gout, if you let gout in your body unmanaged, it basically will form crystals around your joints. And over time, the crystals turns into like these lumps. We call them tophi. And I had developed a tophi, a lump around my toe and my elbow. And I was not in good shape. And so immediately we had to try and get that uric acid level down. And so we did some therapy, we did some oral medication. I tried two medications that are very, it's used within our gout community. One is allopurinol, the other one is Dulor. I used them both, and they did get my levels down. But again, remember, I'm north of 10. And after taking the medication for a few months, I think we were able to drop it down maybe a couple of levels. So from maybe 10 down to about 8. And it really wasn't enough. You need to really get it below 6. The lower, the better. That way the crystals can slowly dissolve. And that's how you prevent future attacks from happening. And I couldn't get it down enough. I needed more time. And I didn't want to give more time. I gave 16 years and I didn't have more time to give. I didn't have another 2 years to, so I was quite frustrated. And one of the conversations one day we had between myself and Chris was he came in, and in our meeting, he said, "Hey, Gary, I'm part of the, I'm a physician that's participating in a trial for this IV medication. It's a new medication that is supposed to lower your uric acid level right away. And so we might be able to save time, right? And what could be another 2 years, Gary, of you being on this oral medication? We might be able to do it overnight, and so let's I'm going to give you all the information. I'm going to answer every single question you have. And then if you think it's right for you, let's sign up and see what happens. And honestly, it was the approach that how Chris came to me with that. We have a trusted relationship. He really answered my questions. I understood my journey up to this point, and I really needed to ask myself questions, pros and cons of what I wanted. The pros are, if this worked, my life is drastically changed and altered. What I've been wishing, striving for, and hoping for the last 16 years possibly could happen, within a few months. On the other hand, I've had hope shoved down my throat during the 16 years, and it was false hope through things, just remedies, home remedies that people would tell me to do. And being a good person who honestly wanted to stop the pain, the gout pain, any way possible, I would do it. And every single time I would be disappointed. Right. So I really had to manage that, realistic hope and expectation. And then I signed up and I said, let's do it. That was in 2010. My treatment was twice a month. And back then it was 6 hours per treatment. So I would sit in a chair. They would stick an IV in my arm, and we would drip this medication into my arm. And it took 6 hours back in the day. I think it's a lot quicker now, but it was 6 hours back then. Twice a month. My treatment lasted for 9 months. And so it was a huge, huge commitment for me. But right off the bat, after the first treatment, my uric acid went from 10 to virtually undetectable. And I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. Within the first month, I started noticing like my tophi was slowly shrinking. But because of the fast pace that my body was changing, it was actually causing more attacks. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I remember thinking during that first 3 months when the attacks really came on, I was thinking, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for a better experience in life, right? With life, I wanted a healthy life, a pain-free life, and here I am experiencing major painful attacks while going through this therapy. If it wasn't for Chris and him taking the time, the VIP treatment he was talking about, where he would take the time to explain to me, Gary, actually, this is a sign that your body is actually healing itself. We're going to have to go through some dark periods before we come to the end of the tunnel where there's light, there's hope, there's freedom from pain. And so after hearing that, and with Chris being my cheerleader, I stuck with the program. And I'm happy to say 9 months later, I was completely pain-free. My tophi had shrunken and disappeared. And at that time, I was able to now fully use maintenance medication, which I use for the rest of my life, right? Because there's no cure to gout, but I use it now to maintain my low uric acid level. I have a home meter that I use to test my levels so that I just know and I can act on that information. I know that my levels are consistently between a 3.5 and a 4%. And then once a year, I will see Chris for maintenance checkup, and we'll do a blood test through the office. But all that to say that it's because of the clinical trial and that opportunity that I had, that I think I'm where I am right now. Could I be in this position without the trial? Maybe, but most likely it would have taken another 2 or 3 years added to that journey, right? So there we go.
I want to highlight a couple of things you said, Gary, that was part of Kim's question in terms of how do you feel? I try to put myself in somebody's shoes. And if I don't even bring up clinical trials, if somebody's doing great, of course, but if somebody's getting beat up badly, they need hope badly. And I am not shy about telling people that the new technologies that come into doctors' hands along the way, wow, some of them really are amazing. As Gary said, it was shocking how well compared to everything else that he had tried before. And that's exactly what we wanted, right? So I want people to really have that hope. And the other thing he shared was time spent with the patient. It's very different than going to see your doctor in clinical trials because they're going to spend more time with you. There's often a nurse or an educator that's really spending a lot of extra time in helping you understand the big picture, just because it's such a different experience. And so I'll say that Kimberly also brought up, did it make you nervous? And I can't speak for Gary, but I know that if I was going through it, I'd be like, well, it is a new medicine. That makes me at least a little nervous, right? As glad as I am to get something new because I need it. And so I feel like that worry and concern or fear that you might have can really be minimized by spending the time, meaning so that I get to explain to people what happened in the trials that led up to the point that we are now. And here's what we do know about the safety. And here's what we do know about the efficacy, meaning how well it worked. So there are ways to minimize worry and concern along the way if you want to participate in a trial like this, or any trial, really.
I think that really, Gary and Dr. Parker, they can typically read my mind, and putting us on to the next slide that we've prepared here on why I should participate, why someone should participate in a clinical trial. We have listed on here, access to the newest treatments, alternative treatment options for patients who don't respond to current medications, opportunities to help others who suffer, and opportunities for one-on-one discussions with experts. Dr. Parker, I feel like you hit on a couple of those points there, the one-on-one discussions with with experts. And can you go a little bit more into, you talked about how, you would recommend a clinical trial to someone doing well, right?
Yeah. I
And
generally never bring it up in those situations.
mhm,
But again, if somebody's not doing well or not doing as well as I think they could, I want
mhm.
them to at least know about it. Not that they have to participate, but it's nice to have another option in your back pocket. And one thing I haven't talked about all night that I do want to cover is that third bullet point, opportunity to help others who suffer. So I remember the lady's name, and it's been probably 15 years since I've seen this lady, who was having a bumpy ride for sure. And I mentioned a clinical trial because I thought she needed it. And she, boom, broke down into tears right before me, not because
Oh, sorry. So I actually think that we may have lost Dr. Parker there. So Gary, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you on this one. I think Dr. Parker was getting ready to talk about the opportunity to help others who suffer, and that was my next question for you. On, was that something that you were thinking about, or how do you feel about that statement today and hearing about people today who are on the medication that you were in the clinical trial for? And you can talk about that medication a little bit too, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thinking back, did I make the right choice for myself? Absolutely, 100%. Right. Going through that clinical trial gave me hope. It gave me a new beginning. Like I said, could I have had the new beginning without the clinical trial? Probably, but it would have taken a lot longer. It's about giving back. Part of why Chris and I started the Gout Support Group of America is to pay it forward. I am so fortunate and I feel so lucky to have connected and have met so many wonderful people that have helped me along the journey. Now that I'm on the other side, I can reflect back. I am so glad. I'm so happy that I had the chance to participate in a clinical trial specifically with Crestexa, to where I look back now and we're looking at what Crestexa is able to do for people that live with unmanaged gout, with chronic gout, with the worst form of gout, where it's really hard to control with oral medication. And I was part of that, and so I feel really lucky, blessed, um, and thinking if I had another opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, I wouldn't check it off my list, right? I would definitely consider it for myself, but I would ask hard questions. If you're thinking
Mhm.
about, participating in a clinical trial, it's not wrong to have reservations. You're going to need to really think through the pros and cons. Just like any medication or any therapy out there right now, there's going to be side effects. Part of the worry that I had was because I was 16 years of trying to manage that on my own with over-the-counter medication. What does that mean when I say over-the-counter medication? Well, with over-the-counter medication, when it comes to gout, it's not maintenance medication. There's really nothing out there that's able to lower your acid level. It's more of pain management. So I was stuck eating, a lot of anti-inflammatory medication. When I say eating, I'm exaggerating, but you get the point where whenever there was an inkling of an attack, I would go to this medication and take it. And over time, it really did a number on my kidneys. And in fact, I can remember um, working with Chris, we checked my organs and whatnot, and I had lost about 20% of my kidney function through using these medications long term and just overusing them because I wasn't thinking about how to proactively manage the condition. I was treating the symptom versus the cause. You see the difference? And over the long term, it really, like I said, it really hurt my kidneys. And so I was thinking, how is this clinical trial going to affect my kidneys, right? So that was a question that I had to ask myself, and Chris was able to answer that. Again, with any therapy, there's going to be pros and cons. There's going to be side effects, and you need to ask the questions, and don't be shy to ask questions. It's never, you're never going to get to the point where you're asking too many questions, and no question is a dumb question, by the way. So,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it looks like we have Dr. Parker coming back in here. And so this is great timing. Dr. Parker, you are, it happens. Wi-Fi is not always, oh, you're on mute, Dr. Parker.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was Wi-Fi. I made it back on my phone app here.
That's perfectly
So anyway,
fine.
good to be back.
We're glad to have you back. So we're actually at the next point here. Gary did a very good job filling in on the previous one, but wanted to talk about how patients can get involved. If you want to get into that a little bit.
Sure. So there are several things I think about in terms of getting involved. One would be how it happened, like Gary described, meaning I know about a clinical trial, or I'm actually doing a clinical trial, and I'm looking for patients who really would fit as candidates. So that's one way. But as I was mentioning at the very beginning, Gary and I, and then Kimberly, we've really wanted to help people who need access to clinical trials know where they are, right? And so that's exactly what Kimberly was mentioning earlier about the GSGA website, so that if we're only interested in gout trials, I realize there's zillions of trials that are out there, but it's a place where you could go and look about what trials are clinically going on and locations, contact info, so that you could seek that out. And that would be the other way. So you explore, and our link gets you to the government website, really, to know about the trials. But you can seek these things out. You don't have to be invited by another doctor. I think that'd be the two ways that I think of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think, let's see, Gary, my next question for you, I feel like you did already answer it, but, I was going to ask you how it makes you feel today knowing that you got to help those with uncontrolled gout, get an approved therapy. And so just want to say thank you again for your contribution to research. Research is just so important, very dear to our hearts, and especially in gout. Dr. Parker, you could probably second this, but there hasn't been a whole lot of innovation in gout treatment for a really long time. And now it's a really exciting opportunity in the rheumatology space in general, that there are a lot of clinical trials. That means there's a lot of research. There's a lot of people who recognize that gout is a problem, and that there needs to be more options. There needs to be more medications out there. So, there is hope. Gary talks about that all of the time. So does Dr. Parker, that there is hope with this. And this is why we like to talk about clinical trials, to try and give everybody that hope there. So before we go to the open Q&A, I want to go ahead and give it to Gary. I'll let you go first, but I want to ask each of you, if you had one piece of advice to give someone who is considering a clinical trial, what would that piece of advice be?
So I will start. If you are considering clinical trials, I want to let you know that there's no more exciting times than the times that we're living in, if we're going to live with gout, right? So probably the best time to have gout, if you want to say that gout is good. But there's a lot of interest in gout. In fact, just with the rare disease and underserved community, the fact that FDA, the government, researchers, healthcare partners, everybody is interested and want to hear from people living with a disease. And maybe in times past that our voice was not that important. Now it is. It's part of the process. We're at the table now. And I would say take advantage of that. I look back and my experience with my clinical trial experience helped pave the way for a medication to come out to help thousands of people. There are 9 million of us gouters here just in America, right? I don't know what that number is when it comes to unmanaged gout, but I bet you it's really high. And they need hope, right? And if you're in a place and you have the opportunity to participate and you feel comfortable after asking all your questions, why not, right? Why not? And for me, it was just an opportunity to grab onto some hope that I did not have for 16 years. And so that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, I guess mine would be go into it with an open mind and just do some fact finding, because no one's going to make you participate, right? It may not be right for you, but at least if you were to go into it and explore and just kind of go, yeah, how often would I have to come, and just ask lots of questions, you'll know if it's right for you after you do that exploration. So just be open-minded. It may be a real benefit.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Parker. All right, everybody. So a couple of things that I want to kind of go over before we get into the Q&A is our amazing website that we have been putting together. And even more amazing is this research page that we have been putting together on clinical trials. And so what you can find on this research page is brand new, launched today actually, is an FAQ of clinical trials. This kind of goes through some of the jargon that's used. It goes through any kind of questions that you may have that you're not quite sure about. This might give you that boost of, information to start exploring a little bit more, to see like, oh, maybe that is the right thing for me, or maybe it's not the right thing for me. Either way, just some good FAQs there for you. Also, we have some really great partners with the Gout Support Group of America, and those partners, we have them listed on our website that have open clinical trials currently in gout. And so on our website, you'll see 3 current open clinical trials in gout with links to clinicaltrials.gov. And also sometimes when there are clinical trials going, the manufacturer will have a separate website that you can go to find out more information about it. Also on that website is the link to clinicaltrials.gov that we, absolutely encourage you to go on. You can search, there's different search tools, but it is the database for every single clinical trial. It could be a little bit overwhelming. And so that's why we pulled out, just a few here for you guys to look at. But if you have questions about what clinical trials are open, definitely check out our website, clinicaltrials.gov, and also your doctor is a great resource for that. And additionally, we have a few new resources that can also kind of help you answer any questions, or help you hear a little bit more about Gary's story and Dr. Parker's story. You definitely heard them today, but Gary and Dr. Parker have put out blogs on their experiences and their perspectives with clinical trials. And we also just released a Clinical Trials 101 one-pager on our website that kind of talks you through some of these items that we talked about here. So another way to learn more about what is going on with GSGA and some of the new resources we have is our GSGA bi-monthly digest. So every 2 months, we send out a newsletter to everyone talking about some of our new resources, upcoming events. Very easy to sign up for this. You can go on to goutsupportgroup.org. At the very bottom of the website, you can see here is just a little box for you to enter your email. We do not sell emails. We do not spam you. You will get the bi-monthly digest. And then if we have upcoming events, you'll get an email for that. So we definitely encourage you all to stay updated with the goings-ons of GSGA and sign up for that newsletter. And so with that, we are going to go ahead and open it up for question and answers right now. And again, just want to say thank you so much to Gary and Dr. Parker for taking the time to talk about their experiences with clinical trials. If you have questions about clinical trials, you can ask us. If you have questions about anything else that has to do with gout, please feel free to ask us as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a Facebook comment that I see on here of somebody stating, and Dr. Parker, this might be good for you, that they signed up for a clinical trial and no one ever returned their call. How, do you have any advice for a patient that is interested in signing up for a clinical trial and maybe isn't hearing anything back,
Yeah.
and what they should do there?
Yeah. I'll first give a disclosure that my wife calls me a bulldog. And the reason is I let go of the bone. So my advice in these kind of situations is, listen, I'll call every day. I'll call every day until, you call me back and say, stop calling. I got no heartache with calling. I don't know why somebody wouldn't respond, but it makes me go, okay, fine, I'll problem solve this thing. I'll double check the numbers, I'll do all that stuff. But I would have no heartache calling again. I wouldn't have any heartache going to the website that Kimberly just mentioned and seeing if there's an alternate number, reach out to anybody I possibly could. Plus, I know that they want me to be proactive. Most of the time, almost all the time, if we're doing a clinical trial, we want people to come. We want to tell them about it. We know it's not going to fit for everybody, but we are certainly looking for people to get involved in the clinical trial. So don't be shy.
Yeah. And also, I do want to add that every clinical trial is not going to be appropriate for every person, correct? And so, I'm sure, Dr. Parker, that you have had patients that have enrolled to be in a clinical trial and have maybe turned down. Can you talk
Yeah,
about that process a little bit? Because I feel like that could be a little disheartening.
it is. One
Any kind of rejection is always a little bit hard, right?
since just had called back yesterday. I thought she was a candidate. This was not a gout study; it was a different study. That she was a candidate for two different trials, and she was in a stuck position where she really didn't have any good medical options. I felt that involvement in a clinical trial may get her access to some good options. She was jazzed about it. And the thing about trials is there's a lot of rules about who can participate. And if you have a lot of other issues going on, they might say no. And that was her case. They go, well, yeah, you have the underlying condition that we want to study, but you have this problem and that problem. And she had this AFib. It's a heart rhythm problem. And they go, listen, you can't participate until you get that stuff settled down and figured out. And she was bummed because she really wanted to participate. And I go, well, listen, I mean, you can't have other stuff that needs attention right now because that's going to really make it hard for us to know if there's a side effect of the medicine, that type of thing. And so she understood, but Kimberly hit the nail on the head there. It can be a letdown if you can't get in a trial when you really want to. But here's more good news in that regard. When the door closes, it's generally closed temporarily, right? So like in her case, she can get her heart rhythm problem squared away and then asked to come back, and there'll be a finite period of time where that's doable. So I wouldn't say the door is always closed. It just might be temporarily.
Yeah, great. Gary, do you think that you would have enrolled in a clinical trial had it not been for Dr. Parker?
I would, yes, I think so. Knowing where it was mentally and what I had been through, I would. The key thing is just asking questions, right, and making sure it fits. Most rheumatologists out there, I'm sure they're not like Chris, but they're going to be pretty understanding. No one's like Chris. He's my guy. So.
But the thing about rheumatology is that Gary brings up, and that is you want it to be a good fit. Mm-hmm. And so even if it's a rheumatologist, they're in my mind the gout experts. But let's say that particular rheumatologist their interest is lupus, let's say, or rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. They may be completely unaware of the trials that are going on in gout. And so if you get the sense that this may not be a great match, then you don't have to stick with him or her. Or you can even ask, Like, hey, do you have anybody who's really knowledgeable and interested in gout? I have a partner like that. He's just not interested. He's smart. He's way smarter than me, I can promise you. But he's just like, that's not my area of interest. And so he'll give me cases, gout cases, because he knows that's my area. And that's completely fair. So make sure the fit's good, and you can communicate, as Gary was saying, put the cards on the table so that way you feel comfortable, doc's comfortable, and you guys can navigate together.
And, I would also say clinical trials are open to you even if you don't have a rheumatologist or a
Sure.
doctor, right? Because you can actually go to the website, the government website, and look at what trials are available. And then you are the one that is making the calls. In fact, you should have this attitude anyways, right? You should be empowered so that you make the calls, ask the questions. And in fact, any clinical trial, when you call them up, they're most likely going to get you connected to what's known as a pre-screener. This pre-screener is going to answer all of your questions, right? Usually they're made up of somebody on the medical team. So they're going to be very knowledgeable. So don't feel like you need to have a doctor on your side or in your corner, or even have insurance to see a doctor, be able to have access to clinical trials. Again, most of the time, sometimes that's just not the case for people, for people that don't have insurance. You're not going to have a rheumatologist. You're not going to have access to a doctor, but you do have access. Yeah, you do have access to that website. You do have access to a phone. And you have access to your voice. Right. So be proactive, and I would encourage you, don't feel like you have to go through a medical professional to have access. Do it for yourself.
Well said.
Thanks. So Dr. Parker, I have a question on here that is not necessarily clinical trial related. But Mary had asked, I got my blood test back, except one apparently wasn't submitted. It appears I have lupus on top of gout. I was suspected to have it when I was a child, but never diagnosed. Does anyone else have this double whammy?
Well, this comes up all the time in my clinic. And as a simple-minded person, this is what I always say. If a dog is scratching, some have ticks and fleas. There's no rule that says you can only have one thing, right? And so what I tell people is, if a dog has ticks and fleas, well, the ticks didn't cause the fleas, and the fleas didn't cause the ticks. They just showed up together. And if you want that dog to feel good, you're going to have to fix both problems. And that is definitely the case here. And so I would just say, hey, now you need a rheumatologist times two, right? And you got to fix one problem or the other. A lot of people will come to me with more than one thing. And I will say gout likes to run with other stuff. In Gary's case, he started very young, and it was the predominant problem. And to this day, that's been the key issue. And he fixes that, and the guy's just a picture of health, right? But some people show up and they got a lot of things going on, and I just go, listen, let's just start fixing them, right? And sometimes we prioritize whatever's making you the sickest, we do first, and then we get to the other thing. So it's totally doable, and don't feel like you're the only one, Miriam.
So we have another note here from Devin saying that yesterday he woke up with a bad flare on his foot and found out after that he doesn't have insurance. Any tips on what I should do to get this flare up gone ASAP?
Yeah.
And I think we can loop clinical trials into this too, right?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. I will say that it's hard to enroll into a clinical trial super expeditiously, but there are trials that they're really studying drugs to stop attacks. So believe me, they're looking for people who are in the flare mode for sure, but they'll want to make sure that in fact you do have gout. So it can take a little bit of time, but don't rule it out, right? Because if we're doing studies in flare medicines, then you need to be hot right now.
Yeah. I was thinking about the insurance part of it.
Yeah.
Not having insurance.
To do a clinical trial, as Gary was mentioning, for sure. You just need a phone. Just call. I feel that lots of patients will try to treat their gout flare-ups before they ever see me. And I really try hard to understand what things that patients have done leading up to their visit with me. Because most people, if it was me, I'd be like, man, I'd be all over Aleve, Advil, Motrin, anything you could get to help with pain control, because the pain is so bad, as Gary described in great detail. The other thing I think about is people without medical insurance will go to urgent care and ER all the time, particularly if they know what works, right? They, oh man, I've had a gout attack before. This medicine works. I just need a prescription, right? Well, that's doable. In fact, ever since the pandemic, telehealth is also pretty available, and medical insurance is not required. You have to pay for the visit, right? And some people will do that. Those are the big ones. I mean, if you said, well, this thing hurts so bad, I mean, if I did nothing, what would happen to me? And I would say, well, most people will have it cool off on its own, even if you do nothing, just as it happened 1,000 years ago, right? It tends to go away, but boy, you want it to go away as fast as possible, right? So that's why I'm kind of throwing out some ideas here.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna add my
Yeah,
two cents. I'm not a doctor. Just thinking through my practical experience. Just like Chris said, I think when you're under a flare and you're in pain, you want the pain to stop. Some over-the-counter medications. Chris had mentioned some of them. You're looking for anti-inflammatory medication. You probably not want to go overboard, but you want to take some meds to taper, take the edge off.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to cure gout. You really need to understand. I think I would encourage you to start becoming a student of gout and learning everything you can about gout. What causes gout? You need to understand what causes gout and what the effects of gout are. Now, what you're experiencing right now is the effects of gout. What causes gout, you're going to have to really embrace and take a look at once maybe the pain has subsided and you're able to think a little bit more clearly and you have a little bit more time. Without insurance in America, I would think we're going to be limited, but maybe there's a way for you to self-pay, pay out of pocket and visit a doctor and let them know, hey, listen, I don't have insurance, but I'd like to pay out of pocket. Now, if you understand a little bit about gout, maybe you can prep the doctor before even coming in saying, hey, I think I have gout, and I think my levels are between this and this. If you have a whole meter, you can actually test yourself. Is that going to be a medically, thing that the doctor takes and say, hey, that's gold standard? Probably not, but I mean, it's going to give the doctor an understanding. If the doctor knows a little bit about gout, he's going to know uric acid level plays a huge part in your gout journey. So if your at-home meter is reading like 8 or 9, even though you might not be 8 or 9 exactly, you're north of 6 for sure. And if you're experiencing an attack, I would bet you've been living with unmanaged gout for years now before even experiencing your first attack, right? So yes, in America, we need insurance typically. Can you see a doctor? I think there's cases where you can self-pay. And then Absolutely. I have to tell you, one of the biggest medication that helps a lot of people and works for most gouters out there, which is a very cheap medication, maybe Chris can talk more about this, is allopurinol. You do need a prescription, but again, if you're self-pay and if you're able to see a doctor that understands gout, right, and not afraid to write a prescription once you're diagnosed with gout, they can write you a prescription for allopurinol. And then with the right dosage on allopurinol, with time and patience, your uric acid level will go down. How much does allopurinol cost? Well, go look. I mean, Walmart, we're talking about $10, $20 or so. I mean, it's low, right?
Allopurinol $4 list at Walmart. So
Yeah. Mhm.
a 3-month prescription is probably $10. And as Gary mentions, if you can, hey, I think if it was me, if I was in those shoes, listen, I would just call an urgent care. It's like, I want to be a self-pay for gout. How much do you think that's going to cost me just for the visit? And if they said, oh, that's going to be $100, you're like, great. I'll show up and tell them what works for me. Anti-inflammatory steroids, cheap medicine, right? You could probably prednisone, commonly used for gout flares, doesn't lower uric acid. Flares, $10 for a prescription. Again, very cheap stuff. And then for long term, as Gary mentions, allopurinol, $4 per month. So prescription 10 at Walmart. So I mean, you can navigate pretty without insurance, without a lot of expense. The lab part at my lab that I used to run, uric acid level was $20 cash price. So you go, well, that's not very bad. I go, yeah, it's not very bad. So don't feel like you have no options. I guess I'll leave it like that.
Yeah.
The
I'll
trick
say
is
too,
just to find, if I could just add this, the trick is just to find a doctor that does understand gout, right? And not write you off, because oftentimes, like my experience for 16 years, I was gaslit for 16 years. And so you just really, if you really think you have gout, you have to, again, find your voice, feel empowered to do what you need to do to get a diagnosis.
So Gary, Dr. Parker, we really look at the Facebook page and see where their needs are. And so with the help of Gary and Dr. Parker, we did develop a checklist for when you go in to see your doctor, with a list of things that you want to go in with a list of questions that you want to ask them. And so that could be a really good resource as well. So having materials, what's really great about GSGA is, I'll say this, is you have a patient and a doctor that are helping develop materials. These are two people who know, where the needs are, what questions to ask. And that doctor checklist, I think, is one of the best materials that we've created so far, because it really allows you, if you are going in and seeing a doctor who maybe isn't really sure about gout, you're going to educate them a little bit. You're going to go in and you're going to have everything that you need on that piece of paper, and hopefully make that process a little bit faster. I'm going to end it on this one because I feel like this kind of ties in with what you all were just talking about. But I feel like we get this question all the time, and I always kind of want to talk about this. This says, once you start allopurinol, you're not supposed to stop taking it, like, ever? Does your body grow dependent on it?
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I get that question all the time, and here's how I answer it. Allopurinol, to fix a problem, becomes a maintenance therapy. That's the exact word that Gary used, and that's true. So what I tell people is, any medicine that you use that improves quality of life, I shouldn't be able to take away from you, right? So if you take away the allopurinol, you can just check your labs and see uric acid goes up. And if it goes over that 6.8, you're going to get gout again. Now, most people don't want that, so they keep it. The easy analogy to work with here is fluoride for your teeth and gums. Most of us don't brush because we have cavities. We brush because we don't want them. It's the same case here. You get your gout stuff taken care of, and you're now doing maintenance. You don't want to go back to the bad old days, right? So you keep it as long as you want to prevent gout from coming back. If you say, hey, wasn't that bad, I'll stop. I'm like, go ahead.
Yeah, and let me just say this, don't be so hard on yourself. I mean, when you think about that question, you really break it down. It's like, am I going to get addicted? Am I going to build a tolerance up? Listen, man, there's no, there's nothing wrong with taking medication that will improve your life, especially if you're chronically ill with a disease that has no cure. Think about what I just said. We have a disease that has no cure, and we're worried about, being known as a pill popper, maybe. And that was part of my thinking. It was a broken way of thinking Honestly, it's from just the misunderstanding of gout, right? And just the fact that people are so hard on themselves. Um, give yourself some grace. Allow yourself to have that grace. It's okay to want a quality of life that is pain-free, my friends. And this is why we're doing what we're doing. I want you to feel empowered it's okay to say, I want freedom from pain, right? It's okay. And I don't think any negatively towards that at all.
And the short answer, Kimberly, is you don't get addicted or tolerant to the medication, just like you don't get addicted to fluoride when you brush your teeth. You just understand for as long as you work with that fluoride, it protects your teeth and gums from bad breath, gingivitis, cavities, all that stuff. Same case here. If you take allopurinol or Uloric, either one, all those medicines do is just inhibit the enzyme in your body that makes uric acid. So if you take it, you make less. If you stop it, you make more. It's not that big a deal. They're very safe medicines. Not that they have absolutely no side effects. That's not true either. So when you say, is there ever a reason why you would stop it? Sure. Same as everybody else. If you're on a medicine that is causing you some troubles, I had one lady tell me she just couldn't get along with Uloric. It bothered her stomach. Well, of course I took her off because I don't want gout or stomach troubles. Like if you don't tolerate a medicine, you're coming off. Right. But I got to find an alternative now. I think that's the take home message. We have options.
So I think this is a really good note to end on is a Q&A, something that we got in the chat here from David, who says, I have a pain-free life with Christexa. And, David, that's what we love to hear. Any kind of medication that you can take to be pain-free, but also, thank you to Gary and Dr. Parker for participating in clinical trials, for going through that, to make the lives of so many other people who are suffering with gout have pain-free lives. That's exactly what we want to hear. Whatever it is that works for you, that conversation with your doctor, with your family, and having the support of all of them and the Gout Support Group of America is really what we're here for, is so we can see everybody who has gout to live a pain-free life, to have managed gout, well-managed gout, be happy, flare-free. That's what we're here for. And seeing things like this is really, not to put words in Gary and Dr. Parker's mouth, but I think that they'll agree. It's what we live for. It's what we love to see. Thank you so much to Gary and Dr. Parker for starting this organization, for letting me be a part of this organization, and all of the really great things that you do. So I want to say thank you to everybody. We hope you have a wonderful night. This will be posted to our Facebook group, and we'll also be posting it on YouTube. Please sign up for our newsletter, all of our information, new events and everything like that coming in there. Continue posting on the Facebook page. Support your gouters, the family, the friends. Just thank you all so much. And we hope you have an excellent rest of your week. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, really.
Peace.
Appreciate you. MCing.
Yes.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.